Happy Thanksgiving, guys, and gobble gobble. I wanted to come to you this evening and bring you a clip that I thought was really appropriate for the holiday season with Thanksgiving being tomorrow. And this episode is of Steven Crowder talking with a young woman on a college campus. And I forgot what college they're at, but he's talking to this one young woman about, she says that Thanksgiving is racist. And he says, of course, it's not. But I'm going to put this up, and you guys can decide and argue amongst yourselves and whatever. But again, happy Thanksgiving, and if you haven't already, please like and subscribe to my content, and I really appreciate those that already have. Thank you.
I don't agree. I think it's a wonderful holiday that should unify the nation. I think it has done me good, will do me good. I say God bless it. Happy Thanksgiving. Okay.
God
if you disagree, you're more than welcome to change my mind.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
So
if you want to scooch in, you can't, so you don't have to lean. Yeah.
So Thanksgiving is actually my favorite holiday as well.
Oh.
I think that where it gets controversial is the origin story that we're taught about it.
Sure.
That Native Americans and Pilgrims peacefully got together
Sure.
and shared a meal, and that's the story that kids are taught. That's kind of the narrative that we push, especially now that you're dressed as a pilgrim.
I appreciate that you recognize the garb. This wasn't all for naught.
But I saw a video that was made in 2015, and it's from cut.com.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a video.
You know, they did peacefully get together to have dinner. You know, maybe they didn't, at other times they weren't peaceful, but they did peacefully get together to have dinner. I mean, could you imagine if they were warring with each other over dinner? It's like, you know, shooting each other over the cornbread. You know, it's like, yeah, I don't think that happened.
That is a series of interviews that they interview Native Americans, and they ask them to describe Thanksgiving in one word, right?
Sure.
And these people say massacre, racist, false holiday,
Sure.
unpeaceful, these kinds of things. So I think if we're asking Native Americans how they feel about the holiday, and that's what they're saying, then shouldn't we listen to them?
Oh, sure, you can listen to them.
Yeah, you can.
Doesn't mean that that's what the holiday.
You can listen to people. It doesn't mean that that's what the holiday means. It doesn't mean that they're correct on something, but you can listen to people. And should you listen to people? Sure, you could hear what they have to say, but other than that, I mean, no. I mean, you can listen to them and you can understand what they're saying, but it doesn't mean that you have to adopt what they're saying and agree with it.
Holiday is.
Okay, so
before we get to, why is it your favorite holiday?
I really like cooking and eating, and that's what the holiday
Yummy.
is about for me. It's about giving thanks to the people in my life. I just think that when people talk about how Thanksgiving
What are you most thankful for?
I guess being able to go home to my family and having that
good
meal.
one. Good.
Yeah, right. But I think that when people are talking about how Thanksgiving is controversial, that's what they're talking about. So how do you come back to that?
Well, it's incorrect.
It's incorrect. Okay.
Yeah, it's incorrect. So Thanksgiving is a celebration of in the 1620s when the Pilgrim settlers did have a meal of Thanksgiving with the I think it's pronounced Wampanoag. Is that, do you know? I want to make sure I'm getting that right. Wampanoag. And they did celebrate, and then had 50 years of peace after that. Now, if we want to talk about the fact that there have been some acts of barbarism committed...
Some acts?
Yeah, of course. Committed against Native Americans, and of course, committed against Native Americans from Native Americans themselves, obviously. Yeah, that happened, obviously, throughout the historical timeline, but that didn't happen at Thanksgiving. And it's interesting because, do you know when Thanksgiving was recognized officially as a federal holiday? So this is why I actually think it's the least racist holiday out there, because it's proactively a holiday designed to symbolize unity. It was Abraham Lincoln who wanted to, after the Civil War, after some... Here, do you mind if I pause real quick? Because I don't have that kind of pull. I assume there's a hunchback up there who has an Antifa face mask. So after the Emancipation Proclamation, actually very soon after, Abraham Lincoln thought it would be a good idea to have a national holiday that symbolized unity for all Americans at this point, black Americans, white Americans. And so they did look back to that 1921 original Thanksgiving that symbolized the old world converging with the new world in 50 years of peace.
Okay.
So in looking to create a unifying holiday across all racial divides, he looked to a moment in early American history, before we were officially a country, where that happened as well. So that's why we celebrate Thanksgiving.
But even if something proactively promotes unity, if there are people who don't feel that way,
Sure.
then those people were marginalized and affected by the acts of barbarism that you said happened.
But not by Thanksgiving. Did it happen throughout history? Sure. But not by Thanksgiving.
But if Thanksgiving is about a moment of unity between pilgrims and Native Americans,
Yeah.
but the rest of the time that those two peoples interacted was filled with violence and inequality,
Yeah.
then why is it just that day?
Well, a couple of things. First off, it wasn't the rest of the time.
It was most of the time.
No.
Millions of Native American people died because of colonial.
It wasn't the rest of the time. And it's just because somebody has, or certain people have a view on something, again, doesn't mean the view is correct about it. It doesn't mean that you have to adopt it as your own. People can have whatever view they want to have of whatever holiday, and they don't need to ascribe to your belief or anyone else's belief.
People coming over.
Well, it's estimated actually about 50% of Native Americans probably were
That's
wiped out.
half the people. That's a
Yeah.
lot of people.
Do you know how many of the settlers were wiped out?
They came
30%.
here. They
30%. So, in other words, it's not a genocide, as
It is
I
a
believe.
genocide.
Well, it's actually not a genocide by definition.
They brought the disease.
Well, hold on a second, guys. Let's just keep the conversations between two folks. They did bring disease. Yeah, they did bring disease with them, and it did wipe out quite a few Native Americans. That was actually before the Thanksgiving. That's why they came back to an abandoned village. I'm sure you're aware of that because they were wiped out by diseases. But largely they hadn't encountered because they hadn't domesticated most animals yet. They hadn't domesticated horses. They had no contact with horses. They were technologically very regressive. They didn't use the wheel. So what happened was there was a moment of peace there for 50 years. We had a very long portion of history that was very peaceful with Native Americans. There were multiple alliances between new settlers and Native Americans because Native Americans were warring with each other. And we do choose, though, as a holiday to celebrate this moment of unity. We choose to celebrate a positive moment. I mean, you can look at Veterans Day or Memorial Day. Well, there are horrible actions
Yeah, I
that
feel
were
the
committed.
same way about those holidays.
Oh, you do?
I do.
Same thing with 4th of July?
Yes.
Same thing with
Yeah, I'm sure she does.
Christmas?
Yeah.
Ramadan?
I'm Muslim, yeah.
Okay. Because obviously slavery is still practiced across the Islamic world. So you believe that...
Okay.
No? Is it not?
I mean, it's practiced across the entire world. Not
the
just
United States.
Not just the
Well, not the
Islamic
United
world.
States.
Well, the
'Cause you're
world
talking about
isn't the United States versus the Islamic world, is it? It's the world, the Islamic world, all different kinds of parts.
Well, in comparison to, example, the settlers in modern America. The point is, but we're not celebrating that with Ramadan, are we? We're not celebrating the Spanish Inquisition when we celebrate Christmas, right? Christians committed some horrible actions. We're not celebrating war with Native Americans when we celebrate Thanksgiving. We're celebrating a moment of peace and unity because it shows that it can be done.
Right. I mean, that's what the thing is. We're celebrating peace. We're celebrating unity, and it's like, this girl and the whole side of the aisle wants to bring up, well, but these bad things happened. Well, yeah, bad things happen throughout history. Horrible things happen. But we're trying to, right now, on this day, celebrate peace and unity. One day. If you want to we'll talk about war every other day and we'll argue and fight and everything else. But if you want to talk about that, fine. But on this one day, can we not agree for things to be, to have a peaceful holiday? Why aren't people allowed to celebrate what they want to celebrate? Why do people gotta feel the way these people feel. Why do we got to feel the way the left feels on things? Again, I'll be quiet.
I think what people want is an acknowledgement that these things happened.
I've already done that.
Right?
Yeah.
Which, an acknowledgement of these racist things that did happen, and implying that maybe the narrative that we push isn't true, and that acknowledging.
People have acknowledged that there were horrible things that happened years ago. They have acknowledged. They have said this.
That there was a disagreement and violence between these people.
Sure.
I think people just want that acknowledgement, and by flat out saying Thanksgiving is not racist, I think a better way to say, I think you could say these things did happen, and this is what it's based on, and Thanksgiving has evolved into become something else. But that doesn't mean I'm going to erase the opinions of Native Americans who suffered.
Well, who erased opinions of Native Americans?
You're not erasing anything. I mean, people don't erase things because they disagree with it. I can have an opinion, somebody else can have an opinion, and those opinions can be different. And I'm not erasing their opinion, and they're not erasing my opinion.
Americans who suffer. That's not what I'm doing.
By saying Thanksgiving isn't inherently racist, you are erasing that.
So in other words, unless I say that Thanksgiving is inherently racist, I am erasing the opinion of all Native Americans.
Yeah, I mean, not all, but those who feel that Thanksgiving is racist.
Well, just because
and they were the marginalized group, and we're pushing this narrative that they were happy to have.
At Thanksgiving they were. And for 50 years they were.
Okay.
So isn't that a good thing?
I've heard that dinner didn't happen.
It did happen.
Okay.
Not only, and I've also heard this, people try to go to the Winthrop Diaries later in, I believe it was in the 1630s, where they had Thanksgivings during times of war against the Pequots. But that wasn't all the same thing. They were thankful for during battle that they had fewer casualties. And so I think that's probably what you're conflating. They teach that often in school. I know it's kind of interesting that you say, we don't teach any of this. When I went to college, when I went to high school, I was only taught about colonialism and how awful the settlers were. I was never taught, for example, of all the warring between the tribes, of the cannibalism, of the scalping that they were doing. I was taught that they were peaceful people, and these settlers came in and stole their land, when the reality was they were warring, they were barbaric. We had many years of peace. We came in, we purchased land, we traded, we had a healthy trading relationship for a while. And
they were barbaric? They lived here. This was their land.
Yeah, they were certainly barbaric.
You could argue that the colonialists were barbarians for coming in and taking their land.
I certainly would say the colonialists were barbaric compared to us today, and I would certainly say that Native Americans.
Yeah, I mean, people, back in time, the Indians were definitely barbaric. The Native Americans, were definitely barbaric, and they were more. They had very limited understanding of certain things that, people evolve. I mean, again, kind of like you said, they weren't even using the wheel. People evolve. They change. They grow. Again, where, Western colonialism, it's like Western Europeans were much more evolved and less barbaric than the Europeans were. So what he's trying to say, she's just trying to find fault with everything he's trying to say, and he's erasing other people's viewpoints because he has a different viewpoint. And again, that kind of stuff really scares me. It's kind of like if we had this notion that we're erasing somebody else's view because we have a different view. That's dangerous. You're basically telling everyone that they can have a different view than whatever group that you say is marginalized. You have to adopt that view, and if you don't adopt that view, you're erasing them. So, again, I think that kind of stuff is dangerous.
Americans were barbaric in their practices compared to the colonialists.
Well, just because you don't agree and understand with something doesn't make it barbaric.
Well, I just mean, the fact that they didn't have plumbing or use the wheel.
They didn't have plumbing?
No, they didn't have plumbing. The Romans
That
did.
doesn't make them inferior to other people.
No, it just means it's barbaric.
Yeah, he didn't say they were inferior. He just said they were more barbaric than they were. I mean, it's like. But again, I watched a really interesting video a couple of days ago when Thomas Sowell was talking, and he said like groups of people that were separated from other people. They did like the Native Americans for many years. They were by themselves around other Native people. They tended to be less evolved as far as their tools and what they built and their equipment and understanding of things. Then they were less understanding of things, then had less understanding than people that were, groups that were in contact with other groups, because you learn from one group to another.
When I'm talking about barbaric, I'm talking about less evolved technologically and societally.
Okay, so definition rather than the connotation.
Yes, definition rather than the connotation.
So you seem to be someone who ignores connotations.
No, I don't.
Girl, all you're doing is you're picking. He's not saying they're inferior, and that's what you're trying to point to. And he's even saying, I'm not saying that. And you're trying to accuse him of doing something that he's saying he's not doing. Just because you want to label him a particular way doesn't mean he is that thing that you're trying to label him as.
Thanksgiving has a negative connotation in some people's eyes, but you're ignoring that connotation.
So does Christmas.
Yeah, so does Christmas. You don't talk about that either?
I do talk about Christmas. I love Christmas. I think it's wonderful and should be celebrated. I know that you've made it clear that you disagree. You don't like Christmas, you don't like Ramadan, you don't like Easter, you don't like Thanksgiving. I believe that there are certain moments throughout American history, I let 4th of July, Independence, that can be celebrated regardless of imperfections throughout history. And I think that's important to note. And I think that it's a good thing to honor and show that there can be a moment in time of peace. Because we had it for 50 years. Regardless of the wars that happened before we came here.
Do centuries outweigh 50 years? Do you think Native Americans are thankful for being put on reservations? Like centuries after Thanksgiving?
Being given reservations after they lost wars? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. So you don't like any of the holidays?
That is what happened. I mean, we can pretend we can, flog ourselves over the head with something, but the fact of the matter is they lost. And yeah, I mean, it's horrible that people died or whatever, but unfortunately, that's what happened. And they did lose wars, and they lost land, and then they were given land by the government in order to kind of appease them, to kind of, kind of make up for any kind of atrocities that were committed. But again, that did not have to be done. Nobody had to give them anything, and that's something we have to, we get to really be honest about. Is nothing had to be given, nothing at all had to be given. And yeah.
Holidays, okay? And you say that I'm completely ignoring someone's opinion if I don't agree with them.
No, that's not what I said. I said that you're ignoring the opinion of marginalized people who the holiday.
You said he was erasing. Erasing is what your words were. That you're erasing their opinion if he doesn't agree.
Affects who the glorification of the holiday negatively affects, because it erases what they say happened to them, and they were here first, so they should have a say in what the narrative is about.
Yeah, I'm not saying they can't have a say. I don't believe it's a racist holiday.
But by erasing someone's experience, erasing someone's experience is a form of racism. Erasing someone's experience and reframing it in.
But I didn't erase anybody's experience.
But by saying it isn't racist, you are erasing someone's experience.
No.
Yes, you are.
No,
Inherently.
he's not.
Incorrect.
Why?
That's not the definition of racism.
What's the definition of racism?
Definition of racism is believing that somebody is inferior solely based on their race.
That's prejudice. Racism is institutionalized discrimination. Yes, it is.
No.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not. You're stating what institutional racism is, but that's not racism. So, you got to really look at what you're saying. It's like nobody's erasing anyone else's feelings about something because they have differing feelings. I don't have to have the same feeling you do, or the same feeling Stephen has, or the same feeling the guy down the street has. And I am not erasing their feelings because of my skin color. Is that because I think that's what you're trying to say, that because he's in a majority, if he has an opinion that's different from somebody that's in the minority, then he is erasing their view. And no, he's not. Their view is still going to be their view, whether or not he agrees with it or not. He's not erasing it. He just has a different view.
It's not.
Yes, it is.
Well, I'm not an institution, so right now we're going with the individualized definition of
And
racism.
you're ignoring the
And you just
institutionalized
accused me
racism.
individually of being racist.
You are
So
by.
let me ask you this. Maybe we can find some common ground here, because you said you love Thanksgiving, but you don't like the holidays. What should we do then? Right? Contact.
She's losing the argument, and she's mad. She's mad. She's mad. Look at her. I'm all mad. I'm all mad because I'm losing this argument, and you're not accepting my viewpoint, and you're a dumb, uneducated white man.
Contact is made between two civilizations, for example. This happens, right? One has rifles and one has wheels and horses, and they engage in peace. And then there are land disputes when land was purchased. So let's just get rid of what we have right now. What would you do? You would have no Thanksgiving? What would we do? What should the United States be? I'm genuinely curious.
I think just an acknowledgement, like everyone should acknowledge what happened.
Yes, I believe everyone does.
I don't think so.
I have.
And why would it matter if they do or they don't? I mean, but again, I think, and she knows that people acknowledge that. They acknowledge horrible things happened. And, but even if they don't, even if people didn't, it doesn't change it. People are going to feel the way they're going to feel. And you can call something whatever you want, but it doesn't mean people have to agree with you. I think, again, that's what the problem is with that side of the aisle is you have to agree with them. And if you don't, then you're automatically by default racist.
Okay.
So is it okay to acknowledge that there were acts of horrible evil and violence across all sides and still celebrate Thanksgiving for what it is? Is that okay?
It's a good question. I haven't thought that far.
Do you think that it is better to celebrate Thanksgiving and recognize a moment of unity and encourage it both with the early settlers, the early pilgrims and the Native Americans, as well as after the Civil War? Do you think it's more productive to have a day to celebrate that and encourage that kind of unity and bridging that cultural divide, or do you think it's less productive?
I think it's performative. So if
So
something
like virtue signaling?
Yeah. So if something's performative, then does it really do the good that you're describing?
What good am I describing?
The unity that you're describing. Like if something is performative, then is that unity really there, or is it a performative unity which doesn't actually?
Well, I mean, you just talked about Thanksgiving cooking and spending time with family. I mean, that's unity right there, right? That's prioritizing giving thanks. I mean, I think that Thanksgiving, honestly, is the least exclusive holiday. Christianity, Christianity would exclude people of
Why?
other
Because it's
religions.
secular.
Ramadan would exclude people of other religions. You can take your pick from any of the religious holidays. Thanksgiving is be thankful for what it is that you do have, whether you're a Christian, whether you're
Well, are
Buddhist,
you and
whether
your
you're Muslim.
family going to talk about what happened to the Native Americans?
I mean, we've talked about it all throughout my life, and I learned about it in school.
Are you going to acknowledge it at the dinner table?
I don't know. Do I have to?
You should.
Okay.
Right?
So we should sit around the dinner table tomorrow and talk, put our heads down and talk solemnly about everything that happened. Instead of being grateful of our food, of our company, of what we're grateful for, we got to sit around that table and feel guilty about something we didn't have anything to do with hundreds of years ago, of a war between settlers and Indians or Native Americans. And I mean, no. Why should we? You're telling people they need to feel guilty about something they had nothing to do with it. Now it's like, and again, well, you benefit out the privilege or whatever. Honey, you're benefiting. You're benefiting right there. You're sitting right there at a university, and I'm sure you're doing well, and I'm sure you come from a good family. But, it's like you want other people to feel guilty, not you. You want other people to feel guilty.
Right? No? Why not?
I didn't say I wouldn't.
You should.
Okay. Well, thank you for telling me what I should and should not do in my personal time.
You're welcome.
And you wouldn't think that that at all in any way is overstepping bounds or being pushy?
No.
Okay.
Of course, she does not feel that way at all. It's like, she has the right to tell you how to feel because you're a white colonizer. You're a white male with privilege because of your whiteness and your sex, and she can tell you what you should or shouldn't feel guilty about. I think that is extremely dangerous talk.
I don't.
All right, well, maybe you should discuss with your family the history that you learned that wasn't accurate that you brought here to the table. And maybe you can all get an accurate account of what happened historically. And maybe discuss as well the acts of barbarism that still go on since you're Muslim across the Islamic world. Do you do that at Ramadan?
Yeah, I do, actually.
You do?
I do.
So what do you discuss at Ramadan?
I discuss
Indentured servitude?
I like to discuss how I think that Islam itself isn't, in certain Middle Eastern countries, how it's unequal for women.
Sure.
And as a woman, and as a Muslim woman who was raised Muslim, I believe that that's unequal, and I will acknowledge that. I like to acknowledge how Saudi Arabia, for example, is guilty of hypocrisy. The royal family has so much money.
I know you're talking a lot lower right now.
Yeah, I am.
Is it because you're concerned about criticizing Islam?
Yeah, I guess so. Maybe that's just ingrained in me.
Well, that's peculiar.
Yeah.
It's ingrained in you not to criticize Islam, but you have no problem criticizing, white Western, it's like no problem at all. But you definitely have a problem criticizing the atrocities that happened with your people. And yeah, I mean, your ancestors. And again, but I mean, just think of how depressing the holidays would be at her house. Like, you got to sit around the table and talk about what people did, what they should feel guilty about and what they shouldn't feel guilty about. And, their ancestors and what kind of atrocities they committed, and feel bad for these people and that people and whatever. But I really don't believe that she sits around. I'm pretty sure they don't sit around and talk about how bad they are and how bad their family was. Yeah, I mean, just think of how depressing it would be to be in the house.
It is. Nice talking to you.
Well, I appreciate it, and I appreciate your intellectual honesty there, and that you have those discussions. I don't. By the way, I don't think you need to do that at Ramadan. I think that enjoying Ramadan for the holiday that it is and celebrating it with your family is a wonderful thing, regardless of. Listen, Muslims are imperfect. Christians are imperfect. Native Americans are certainly imperfect. If you go back to old colonial England, the Church of England are certainly imperfect. But the Irish are certainly imperfect. But it's not my business to tell them what they need to discuss on St. Patrick's Day.
Just when I saw that video and when I've talked to Native American people and just heard about what happened, I just have empathy for what they say.
Sure.
And it just makes it difficult to not speak up for them.
I have empathy. Here's the thing. I hope you understand. I mean?
Like,
I have empathy as well, but you can also have empathy and understand that what people are saying is inaccurate. For example, I have a relative who's bipolar, okay? I'm not saying Native Americans are bipolar. This is an example. I hope you understand this, right? I have a relative who's bipolar, and he will describe situations or scenarios that are not real.
And you have empathy for him?
And I have empathy for him, but it's not necessarily accurate. And so I love him, and I care about him, and I let him know that I love him and I care about him, but I don't engage on the plane, on the wavelength that what you're saying is accurate.
I don't think you can compare severe mental illness to the way people feel about.
We're not supposed to use the term mental illness anymore.
Yes, you are.
Depending on what it is, depending on how it's defined by the DSM-5.
I'm mentally ill, and I use that term.
I'm definitely mentally ill. Again, I was saying I'm not comparing bipolar to Native American. I was saying that one can have empathy without necessarily agreeing with the premise as far as its accuracy. So I can have empathy for Native Americans saying, hey, Thanksgiving to me represents all of these wars that occurred and these battles and genocide, and I can say, hey, I understand how you feel, but that's not what Thanksgiving is celebrating. And I can say, I understand how you feel, but there also wasn't mass genocide committed if you actually look at it.
There was mass genocide committed.
By definition, it wasn't genocide. There were wars, and one side won. Right. One-sided war, mind you. But, there was by that definition, there was genocide with the Mohawks and the Mohicans, the Algonquins and the Iroquois. I mean, they would cannibalize people in front of their family, right? If one of them had advanced technology, in other words, one of them were as advanced as the early settlers.
I'm going to cut the video here, but yeah, really, we don't have to accept the view of somebody else. Just because somebody has a different view, you can have empathy for them. You can feel, okay, you know what? I feel bad for the way you feel about something. But that doesn't mean I think it's correct. It's like you could look at something a certain way and come to a certain view. But that doesn't mean I have to adopt that view. It's like I understand the first slaves came over, back in 1619 or whatever. But that doesn't mean I agree with that's the way the country started. It was built. It doesn't mean that I feel that it was built on the back of slaves. Not at all. I don't have to buy that. And it does mean that I refute that slaves weren't brought over. I know they were. But I don't have to buy that type your view of history as far as that was the only way America was built. Of course not. That's the most ridiculous thing that I've heard. And I don't have to buy it. And I have the right to say that. And I'm not erasing anyone else by saying that. Anyways, guys, I'm going to go. And if you would, please hit that like button and subscribe to my content. Thank you. You son of a